I want to talk about President Weah's wealth. I've been reading a lot. Certainly, I've not seen his name in the Panama Papers, but I've been reading a lot. We know there are African leaders, of course, leaders around the world that are notorious for having huge bank accounts in Switzerland and so forth. But let's talk about President Weah's wealth here in terms of before he became president. It's almost as if you were being a surgeon performing on the myth of perhaps his wealth as a soccer star or as a football star, because we have the assumption that those who are high-profile players on the global stage do walk away very wealthy, and it's fair to say that there are people who probably thought that President Weah coming into office was a wealthy man. Talk about your findings on that. Is George Weah, the current president of the Republic of Liberia, when he went into office, when he was elected in at the time, was he a wealthy man?
I couldn't have written this book without this chapter on wealth, because everywhere you go, there's seeing some things on Google that he's worth $80 billion and all that. So I did some research, and I worked with a group of journalists who did a book on FIFA. And they did find out during their time of the investigation that the president was being held by a check from one of those who was lobbying for Kuwait to get the World Cup, the last World Cup. And there was a thing that happened, in terms of the role that whole issue with the check played with President Weah at the time, opposition leader George Weah. And so it seems like the findings goes back to the pre-days of the Didier Drogba, David Beckham, and all of those celebrities. Those days, athletes didn't make the money they make it now. And what we found out during the investigation was that between the period George Weah, the footballer, played, his income didn't exceed $10 billion. That was from Monaco to PSG, from PSG to AC Milan, and then his career began to take a dip. And so it wasn't a billionaire or millionaire or whatever after he left the game. From what we gather, he wasn't. In fact, he had done some investment in some radio station, some investment in Florida and other places, which were not doing so well. And so those things are documented in the book from what we discovered.
So, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, Rodney, because on page 181, on the chapter on wealth here, you talk about the new properties, the condos, the complexes that started going up when he became president. And it raises a fundamental question in terms of where did these resources come from? Is this coming at the expense of the taxpayers of Liberia? Does the president have a private slush fund? I mean, does he have a Swiss bank account? I don't know, I'm asking a question. Talk about that though, in the context, given that he was not a LeBron James. He was not a Magic Johnson when he entered into politics in Liberia. How is it that we're able to see all these private developments right after he assumed office?
Well, that's the problem that a lot of people have when that project began to take place. Because where those buildings are, before, in January of 2018, when he took over, it was a football field. By September, October, those 68 buildings were completed, furnished, and raised an eyebrow because people were like, he didn't do this when he was in opposition. How is he doing it now? Some of his aides said some of the money came from donors or gifts, from personal gifts from people that he used. But it's very difficult to find out whether it was his personal money, because there was no record or trail of that money before he became president.
Now, I don't know how this works, but do candidates running for president in Liberia have to make a financial disclosure?
Yes, they do. And that was a very controversial issue because the declaration he made didn't reflect the buildings he built. And so people will have that controversy, that question about where did the money come from. And I could not write that book without that chapter because I thought it put things into perspective and put things into context.